Men Without Women, the latest collection of short stories by Japan's biggest literary import, Haruki Murakami. As the title suggests, these are a collection of stories all focusing on men both in and outside of relationships with members of the opposite sex, okay? And we're gonna start out with some positives, okay? Isn't that nice? A lot of people think that I'm reading Murakami just so I can get on here and troll and talk shit about him. Maybe subconsciously that's partly true, but this is my 6th Murakami I've read, so obviously I'm invested in him on some level as an author. There are a lot of things I like about him. And I was watching a recent video from Michael over at Michael Reads. I'll link him down below. And he was talking about the reasons why he likes Murakami, talking about how Murakami is able to kind of, you know, summon this very dreamlike state that Michael gets very wrapped up in. And I agree with Michael. I totally think that. I think Murakami has a brand of quirkiness and a very accessible, imaginative kind of style that's, you know, very approachable by a lot of different people. Unfortunately, I don't think that kind of dreamy state is enough to the point where it's been able to carry an entire novel out of all the stuff I've read by him. But it's certainly there, undeniably. And then on the con side of the track, I wanted to mention Val over at Val Reads. And Val recently did a video on Murakami where she talked about why she's kind of giving him up. And I think to her, you know, it was a combination of his repetitive storytelling mixed with his kind of offensive content. And that seeps into that word, which I always try to avoid, which is problematic. It's a word I hate. It's tough when discussing Murakami because certainly I read a lot of problematic material and I have no problem with it. I'm a grown adult and I'm able to pick apart stuff and I'm able to say, you know, I really like this part of a book, but I really thought this part was problematic or offensive or what have you. And I can still like said book because of that problematic content. But that's a whole nother video. My problem with Murakami in regards to the problematic thing is that as a whole, that offensive stuff is usually the result of lazy and uncreative writing. And I'll touch on that with my thoughts on Men Without Women. So, Men Without Women, the short story collection, when picking this book up, the million-dollar question is, at the ripe old age of 68 years old, has Haruki Murakami learned anything about women? And I mean anything. And the resounding answer is no, okay? And unfortunately, you only have to go to the first paragraph of the first story within this collection to answer that question. And the first story in here is called Drive My Car, okay? It's a story about an actor who's recently lost his wife and he's being escorted around by a female driver in which he kind of, you know, has different conversations with. And again, this is the first line in the first story of the whole collection, okay? Based on the many times he had ridden in cars driven by women, Kafuku had reached the conclusion that most female drivers fell into one of two categories. Either they were a little too aggressive or a little too timid. Luckily, and we should all be grateful for this, the latter were far more common. Generally speaking, women were more cautious than men behind the wheel. Of course, that caution was nothing to complain about, yet their driving style tended to irritate others on the road. Let's forget that the whole sentiment of women being like different drivers is sexist and offensive. I think we can all agree that the analogy is just so lazy. And I thought, people, that we kind of had this unconscious cerebral agreement as human beings and as writers that we're not going to use like metaphors relating anything, whether it be women, sex, or, you know, whatever. We're not going to relate anything to the act of driving or the act of cars. Like, really, women are a different type of drivers? It's just so stupid. And the book in every story is just riddled with these really lazy, uncreative choices. Let's move to by far the most offensive story in here, which is called The Independent Organ, okay? And this is a story about a doctor who after losing contact with a woman that he had been having an affair with, he literally starves himself to death. He stops eating. And listen to this little gem related to anorexia. As I'm sure you know, it's almost always young women who get anorexia. They cut back on calories so they can look good and lose weight. And soon, losing weight itself becomes its own goal, and they end up starving themselves. In extreme cases, these women hope to reduce their weight to nothing. So even though it's unthinkable that a middle-aged man would become ill with anorexia, in Dr. Decay's case, that's exactly what happened. Of course, this had nothing to do with wanting to appear more attractive. I think he literally could not manage to swallow any more food because he was lovesick. So let's just make this clear, people. Women have anorexia because they want to look good, but when men have anorexia, it's for a much more complex matter of the heart. Like, it's just so dumb. And oh, people, in case you're wondering what the title "An Independent Organ" refers to, let's reference page, 114. Listen to this. Women are all born with a special independent organ that allows them to lie. This was Takai's personal opinion. It depends on the person, he said, about the kind of lies they tell, what situation they tell them in, and how the lies are told. But at a certain point in their lives, all women tell lies, and they lie about important things. They lie about unimportant things too, but they also don't hesitate to lie about the most important things. And when they do, most women's expressions and voices don't change at all. Since it's not them lying, but this independent organ they're equipped with that is acting on its own. That's why, except in a few special cases, they can still have a clear conscience and never lose sleep over anything they say. What is going on, Haruki? And you could say, Adam, this is a piece of fiction. Characters are allowed to be horrible people. They're allowed to be sexist. They're allowed to say shitty things. And I absolutely agree with that sentiment. And like I said, some of my favorite characters of all time would be labeled as problematic. The difference is that this man and this kind of broad outlook on life and women and whatever is the same dude that appears over and over and over and over and over in every goddamn Murakami book. And it's that contrast between the men and the women in all of his books that really highlight that disconnect that Murakami holds with the female sex. Because all the men in his books are these very kind of chill, laid back, seemingly normal dudes. They love jazz, they love whiskey, they love food. They walk straight out of a French New Wave movie, right? They're very cool. And then compare that to the women in these books who are spastic, pixie-like, over-sexualized, one-dimensional cartoon characters with little to no substance. And it just clashes horribly, and it just really shows that here, Murakami has no idea what's going on. The best story in Men Without Women is by far one called Kino, okay? And Kino is a quintessential Murakami story. It's about a cool, laid-back dude who owns a tiny bar, and, he plays Billie Holiday, and he serves whiskey, and there's a weird cat that hangs around the bar. It's classic Murakami, right? But unfortunately, it's also classic in the sense that in the middle of the story, the title character Kino has sex with a female customer who has, cigarette burns all over her vagina. It's too much, people. Men Without Women, 2017. Murakami has little to nothing to say about the female sex, and what he does have to say should be promptly ignored. Okay? Have a good one.